Think you could survive a day with Vikings? You can't even start a fire without a lighter. While you're complaining about your Wi-Fi speed, Viking children were learning to gut fish and survive winters that would literally kill you in hours. And that's just the beginning. The actual reasons you wouldn't last are way more brutal than you think. I spent weeks researching Viking life and found 17 reasons that prove modern humans are embarrassingly soft compared to these people. We're talking about skills, living conditions, and cultural practices so harsh that most of what you've seen in movies doesn't even scratch the surface. Some of these facts are going to make you genuinely uncomfortable. But here's the thing, understanding how Vikings actually lived shows you just how easy we have it today. And trust me, by number 14, you're gonna be glad you were born in the 21st century. Let me start with something that would end your Viking adventure before it even began. You know how you flip a switch for light and turn dial for heat? Vikings had none of that. And I'm not talking about just being a little cold or sitting in the dark. Without fire, you're dead. That's not an exaggeration. Vikings needed fire for literally everything. Cooking, warmth, light, purifying water, and keeping predators away. But starting a fire wasn't easy. They used flint, steel, and specialized tinder that they prepared by boiling fungus. Yes, boiling fungus. This was a skill that took years to master. You needed to understand different types of wood, how dry they needed to be, how to protect your flame from wind, and how to keep it going in wet conditions. Here's what most people don't realize. In Nordic winters, hypothermia can set in within hours if you're not properly prepared. The temperature could drop so low that your fingers will literally freeze while you're trying to strike that flint. One mistake with your fire and you're done. No backup lighter in your pocket. No calling for help. Just you versus the elements. And the elements always win when you don't know what you're doing. Modern people have zero experience with real firecraft. We've got matches, lighters, even apps that can help us start fires. Vikings had rocks and knowledge, and that knowledge meant the difference between life and death every single day. But let's say you somehow managed to get a fire going. Congratulations, you've solved 1% of your problems, because now comes the physical labor that would absolutely destroy your body. Most Vikings weren't warriors, they were farmers. And Viking farming was nothing like modern farming. We're talking about sun up to sundown back-breaking work that would make a modern gym workout look like a vacation. They spent entire days plowing fields by hand, managing livestock without any machinery, repairing tools they made themselves, and spreading manure across acres of land. Think about your typical workday. You probably sit at a desk, maybe stand for a few hours, perhaps lift some boxes if you work retail. Viking farmers were moving hundreds of pounds of material, walking miles every single day, and doing physical labor so intense that their bodies were completely different from ours. Their muscle density, their cardiovascular capacity, their pain tolerance, all of it was developed from childhood through constant, relentless physical work. And here's something wild. This wasn't just the men. The division of labor was brutal for everyone. Women produced all textiles from scratch. Think about that for a second. Every piece of clothing started with a sheep. Women had to shear the sheep, clean the wool, spin it into yarn, and then weave it into fabric. This process took months for a single garment. They also brewed all the alcohol, cooked massive meals for extended families, and milked livestock multiple times per day. Your modern skill set would be completely worthless. You can code? Great. There are no computers. You're good at marketing? Nobody cares. You can drive a car? Congratulations. There are no cars. The skills that make you valuable today meant absolutely nothing in Viking society. If you couldn't contribute physical labor, you were a burden. And burdens didn't last long. Now here's where things get really dark. Even if you somehow adapted to the physical demands, you'd still have to face constant starvation. Vikings literally named February the hunger month. That's how bad it got. They faced seasonal starvation so regularly that they just accepted it as part of life. Their entire society was built around the reality that for several months each year, food would be scarce and people would go hungry. Do you have foraging skills? Can you identify which plants are edible and which will kill you? Do you know how to preserve meat through smoking and salting? Can you ferment fish so it lasts through winter? Can you track and hunt animals with handmade weapons? Because if you can't do all of those things, you're going to starve. Modern humans have zero experience with real hunger. We think we're hungry when we skip lunch. Vikings dealt with actual starvation, the kind where your body starts consuming itself, where children's growth gets stunted, where people's immune systems shut down. The leanness times tested every ounce of physical and mental resilience they had. And you know what makes this even worse? Even if you survive the hunger, the disease and injuries will probably kill you anyway. Here's a horrifying statistic. 30 to 40% of Viking children died before reaching adulthood. Almost half. Think about that. If you were a Viking parent, you expected to bury multiple children. This wasn't unusual or tragic in the way we think of it today. It was just reality. Medical care was essentially prayer, herbal remedies, and bone setting. That's it. You get a deep cut that gets infected, you're probably going to die. You break a bone badly, you might never walk properly again. You catch pneumonia, start saying your goodbyes. There were no antibiotics, no surgery beyond the most basic procedures, no pain relief beyond alcohol and biting down on leather. Let me tell you about a Viking named Sigurd the Mighty. He killed an enemy in battle and strapped the guy's severed head to his saddle as a trophy. During the ride home, one of the dead man's teeth scratched Sigurd's leg. That small scratch got infected from the necrotic tissue, and Sigurd died from the infection. A scratch from a dead man's tooth killed a legendary warrior. Your modern immune system is soft. It's been protected by vaccines, antibiotics, and sanitation your entire life. The pathogens Vikings dealt with daily would overwhelm your body in ways you can't imagine. Speaking of sanitation, let's talk about something that would make most modern people physically ill. Vikings bathed once per week. Once. And not in a nice warm shower. In cold rivers. There were no flush toilets. They used open latrines or just went outside. Extended families, including parents, children, grandparents, servants, and slaves, all slept in the main room of their homes together. We're talking about zero privacy, zero personal space, and hygiene standards that would be considered unacceptable in any modern context. Some Viking homes had ingenious water systems. They actually piped river water under their floors using stone channels. But that water wasn't treated. Drinking contaminated water was a constant risk. Modern immune systems, pampered by clean water and proper sanitation, would be devastated by the pathogens in untreated Viking water sources. And here's something that really shows how different Viking life was. The level of violence that was just accepted as normal. Viking society practiced dueling to settle disputes. It was called holmgang. If someone challenged you to a duel and you refused, your reputation was destroyed forever. You'd be branded as a coward, and in Viking society, that was worse than death. These weren't friendly sparring matches. These were fights where people died regularly. The rules were brutal. You fought in a ringed area, often on a small island, so you couldn't run away. You could have a proxy fight for you if you were old or disabled, but that cost money most people didn't have. And here's a really messed up part. Berserkers, these legendary warriors, would abuse the homegang system to legally rob people. They'd challenge weaker men to duels over property or women, knowing they'd win and just take whatever they wanted. The system was finally outlawed in Iceland in 1006 and Norway in 1014 because too many people were using it for legalized murder and theft. But the violence went way beyond dueling. Criminal justice was harsh beyond anything we can imagine today. Minor offenses could result in banishment, mutilation, or execution. There were no police to protect you. Your safety depended entirely on your clan and your reputation. If you were weak, unlucky, or just in the wrong place at the wrong time, nobody was coming to save you. And then there's slavery. This is something movies often gloss over, but slavery was everywhere in Viking society. Raiding produced massive slave populations who did the hardest, most dangerous work. And here's what's truly terrifying. Anyone could become a slave. If you were captured in a raid, regardless of your gender, age, or background, you could be enslaved. Your merit meant nothing. Your previous status meant nothing. You were property. Research shows that most Viking slaves didn't die peacefully. Many were sacrificed when their masters died, forced to accompany them into the afterlife. There's an account from an Arab explorer named Ibn Fadlan who witnessed a Viking funeral. 6 men raped a female slave, then she was strangled with a rope while simultaneously being stabbed repeatedly. This wasn't considered unusual. This was just how things were done. Let's talk about something that would kill most modern people within days: the cold. You know those high-tech winter jackets that cost $300? The ones with synthetic insulation and moisture-wicking technology? Vikings had wool, leather, and thin linen. That's it. No heated homes beyond a central fire. No thermal underwear. No weatherproof boots. Yet they survived Nordic winters where temperatures regularly dropped below zero. Modern people would get frostbite within hours of exposure. We're so dependent on technology to keep us warm that we've literally lost the ability to survive cold weather naturally. Vikings built their entire lives around staying warm with minimal resources. They knew how to layer clothing for maximum insulation, how to position themselves relative to fires, how to build shelters that trapped heat, and most importantly, how to keep moving to generate body heat even when exhausted. But surviving the cold was just one piece of the puzzle. You also needed bushcraft skills that take years to develop. Can you forage for edible plants without poisoning yourself? Do you know how to smoke meat properly so it doesn't spoil? Can you ferment fish? Can you build fishing gear from scratch? Can you track animals through snow and forest? Can you process an entire animal carcass without wasting anything? These weren't optional skills. This was baseline knowledge that Viking children learned before they were teenagers. If you couldn't do these things, you'd burn through any food supplies you had in days and then starve while surrounded by potential food sources you didn't know how to access. And here's something that will shock modern people: the role of women in Viking society. Viking women had real power. They could own property, divorce their husbands, and enforce social rules. But this wasn't some progressive feminist paradise. The power came with brutal expectations. Women were expected to be just as tough, skilled, and capable as men in their domains. A Viking woman who couldn't produce textiles, brew alcohol, preserve food, and manage a household while pregnant or nursing children will be seen as useless. Gender equality in Viking society was based on capability, not comfort. Everyone had to pull their weight or they were a liability. There was no room for weakness regardless of your gender. Now let's talk about religion, because this would mess with most modern people's minds in ways they wouldn't expect. Viking life revolved around omens, sacrifices, and magical protection. They sacrificed animals regularly, and sometimes humans, to appease their gods. They believed in signs and portents that determined major life decisions. If you showed skepticism or disrespect toward these practices, you could be killed or exiled. Imagine being an atheist or following a modern religion in Viking society. You'd have to fake belief in Norse gods, participate in rituals that might include human sacrifice, and treat magical charms and runes as if they actually worked. One wrong comment about their beliefs, and you'd be labeled as dangerous and possibly killed to prevent bad luck from spreading to the community. The supernatural wasn't separate from daily life. It was woven into everything, and you had to take it seriously or face serious consequences. Viking law was also completely different from anything we know today. They had assemblies called things where communities gathered to resolve disputes. If you couldn't defend yourself verbally or physically at a thing, you could be declared an outlaw. And being an outlaw didn't mean jail time. It meant anyone could kill you legally. You lost all protection of the law and society. There were no lawyers to represent you, no appeals process, no innocent until proven guilty. Justice was decided by whoever could argue most convincingly or had the most powerful supporters. If you were weak, foreign, or just unpopular, you had essentially no legal protection. Let me tell you about Viking food, because this would break most modern people immediately. Vikings ate preserved fish, wild seaweed, foraged herbs, and meats you'd never find in a supermarket. We're talking about fermented shark, dried cod that was hard as wood, blood sausages, and organ meats from animals. And here's the critical part. Refusing food wasn't an option. If you were offered food and you turned it down because it seemed gross or you were picky, you'd be seen as insulting your host and ungrateful for their generosity. Modern people have incredibly narrow food preferences. We're used to processed, seasoned, consistently prepared meals. Viking food was whatever they could preserve through the winter or forage in their environment. Your stomach would reject most of it. You'd be hungry and surrounded by food, but unable to eat it because your body wasn't adapted to process it. Here's something really brutal. Even the sports and entertainment would injure or kill you. Vikings had a drowning competition. Read that again. They would hold each other underwater to see who could last longer. People died doing this. They also had a ball game called Nadaliker that was full contact and resulted in serious injuries regularly. Even their wrestling involved a flat stone called a finella where you could break your opponent's back. After meals, they played a game called Nudukast where they threw leftover bones at each other trying to cause injury. One saga describes someone getting hit in the eye so hard the eyeball fell out of the socket onto his cheek. This wasn't considered unusual. This was just entertainment. And they filed their teeth. Vikings filed horizontal grooves into their front teeth and dyed them red to look more terrifying in battle. This was probably adopted from indigenous peoples in North America that early Viking explorers encountered. Can you imagine the pain of filing grooves into your teeth without any anesthesia? Just raw nerve exposure and blood while someone carved patterns into your face? But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Viking life was what they did to the dead. Chieftain funerals involved human sacrifice and sexual rites that are almost unthinkable today. There's an execution method called the blood eagle that's so horrific. I'll just give you the basics. They would cut someone's ribs from their spine while they were alive, pull out their lungs, and drape them over the victim's shoulders to look like wings. This was reserved for special enemies and was meant as a sacrifice to Odin. Archaeological evidence shows that Vikings routinely mutilated corpses of defeated enemies as displays of victory. They'd chop off limbs, decapitate bodies, and arrange remains in ways meant to humiliate the dead and impress the gods. Dying wasn't the end of your misery. What happened to your body afterward was part of the psychological warfare and religious practice. Even graves tell brutal stories. Some burial sites contain people who were decapitated, had limbs removed, or were buried in ways suggesting they died violently and were treated with contempt afterward. This wasn't rare or unusual. This was just how things worked. Let me give you one final reality check about why you wouldn't survive. Vikings dealt with parasitic worms as a normal part of life. Archaeological examination of Viking feces shows eggs from roundworms, whipworms, and liver flukes. These parasites lived inside Vikings constantly. The roundworms grew to 30 centimeters long in their intestines. The liver flukes damaged their organs. These parasites weakened immune systems, caused anemia, and contributed to the high death rates. Modern descendants of Vikings still carry genetic modifications that developed to fight these parasites, modifications that now cause emphysema and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The biological adaptations needed just to survive daily life were so extreme that they're still causing health problems 1,000 years later. Your body hasn't developed these adaptations. You'd be infected with parasites within weeks, and they'd slowly destroy you from the inside while you're also trying to survive everything else I've described. So there you have it. 17 reasons why modern humans are embarrassingly soft compared to Vikings. We can't start fires, can't handle physical labor, will starve without grocery stores, have no resistance to disease, couldn't survive without modern sanitation, would be horrified by the accepted violence, couldn't handle the cold, lack all the necessary survival skills, would struggle with the social expectations regardless of gender, couldn't fake the religious beliefs convincingly, would fail in the legal system, couldn't eat the food, would be injured by the entertainment, couldn't endure the body modifications, would be traumatized by the death rituals, and would be killed by parasites our bodies can't fight. Viking life was brutal in ways that movies and TV shows barely touch on. These weren't superhuman warriors. They were just people who lived in conditions so harsh that their entire existence was built around survival. Everything they did, from childhood to death, was about staying alive in an environment that wanted to kill them. We live in incredible comfort and safety compared to Vikings. And honestly, that's something to be grateful for. If you want more brutal history facts, check out the next video.